Hello everyone, this is the Dialectical House Party recording for March 26, 2026. In this recording, we continue our reading from Chapter 2 of the book, Introduction to the Basic Principles of Marxism-Leninism, translated by Luna Nguyen. We resume from Annotation 118, which is on page 122 when using the double-page view of the PDF version. I hope you enjoy. So let's read. In contrast to the metaphysical viewpoint, in materialist dialectics, development refers to the motion of things and phenomena with a forward tendency from less advanced to more advanced, from a less complete to a more complete level. Now we dive into Annotation 118. In materialist dialectics, motion, also known as change, is the result of mutual impacts between or within things, phenomena, and ideas. And all motion and change results from mutual impacts which themselves result from internal and external relationships with other things, phenomena, and ideas. Any given motion change leads to quantity changes, and these quantity changes cumulatively lead to quality changes. See Annotation 117, page 119, which, by the way, was covered in our previous video. Grasping this concept, that development is driven by relations, is critically important for understanding materialist dialectics. And now we see a graphic which shows three circles, and within the circles are ideas for external relationships, or rather labels, external relationships, internal relationships, and what is depicted is water, a watering can being used to apply water to a plant, a potted plant, and that is labeled internal external relations drive change development, the application of water, nourishment to the potted plant. The second circle shows the plant growing and is labeled change development leads to quantity changes, that is to say, the plant is growing, obviously. And then the third circle shows the plant in a more mature stage. Quantity changes lead to quality shifts. And the overall graphic is titled, The Concept of Change in Materialist Dialectics Centers on Internal and External Relationships, causing mutual impacts which lead to quantity changes, which build into quality shifts. This process, taken in total, is referred to as development. Development represents the entire process in which internal and external change motion leads to changes in quantity, which in turn lead to changes in quality over time. The process of development can be fast or slow, complex or simple, and can even move backwards. And all of these properties are relative. Development has a tendency to develop from less advanced to more advanced forms. The word tendency is used to denote phenomena, development, and motion which inclines in a particular direction. There may be exceptional cases which contradict such tendencies, but the general motion will incline towards one specific manner. Thus, it is important to note that development is not necessarily good or bad. In some cases, development might well be considered bad or unwanted. For example, rust developing on a car is typically not desired. So the tendency of development from lower to higher levels of advancement implies a forward motion, though this motion can take an infinite number of forms, depending on the relative perspective. Development can also temporarily halt in a state of equilibrium. See Annotation 64, page 62. Or it can shift direction, though it can never reverse, just as time itself can never be reversed. For example, during a flood, water may develop over the land, and as the floodwaters recede, this may alternatively be viewed as another forward development, process of recession, a development of the overall flooding and receding process. The flood is not actually reversing. The development is not being undone. Floodwater may recede, but it will leave behind many traces and impacts. This is not a true reversal of development. The false belief that development can be reversed is the root of conservative and reactionary positions. See Annotation 208 on page 202. Development can be considered positive or negative, depending on perspective. Some ecosystems have natural flood patterns, which are vital for sustaining life. For a person living in a flood zone, however, the flood would most likely be considered an unwanted development, whereas flood recession would be a welcomed development. And what you'll see on your screen now is a graphic that illustrates this point, in which you show the development of the process of a flood and development of the process of a flood recession. It is important to note that the definition of development is not identical to the concept of motion, change in general. It is not merely a simple quantitative increase or decrease, nor a repetitive cyclic change in quantity. Instead, in materialist dialectics, development is defined in terms of qualitative changes with the direction of advancing towards higher and more advanced levels. See diagram relationship between motion, quantity, quality shifts, and dialectical development, Annotation 119 below. Development is also the process of creating and solving objective contradictions within and between things and phenomena. Development is thus the unified process of negating negative factors while retaining and advancing positive factors from old things and phenomena as they transform into new things and phenomena. Annotation 119 begins, a contradiction is a relationship in which two forces oppose one another. Although a contradiction might exist in equilibrium for some amount of time, see Annotation 64, page 62, eventually one force will overcome the other, resulting in a change of quality. This process of overcoming is called negation. In short, development is a process of change in a subject's quantity as well as negation of contradictions within and between subjects, leading to quality shifts over time. Characteristics of development. Every development has the characteristics of objectiveness, generality, and diversity. The characteristic of objectiveness of development stems from the origin of motion. Now we get to Annotation 120. Remember that in materialist dialectics, objectiveness is the relative characteristic that every subject has of existing and developing externally to all other subjects. See Annotation 108, page 112. Since motion originates from mutual impacts which occur between external things, objects, and relationships, the motions themselves also occur externally, relative to all other things, phenomena, and objects. This gives motion itself objective characteristics. And the graphic you see on your screen is labeled relationship between motion, quantity, quality, shifts, and dialectical development. And it depicts icons for motion, for a quantity shift, for a quality shift, and then dialectical development. And it's labeled below the graphic itself. Dialectical development consists of quantity and quality shifts, which in turn derive from motion. Development is derived from motion as a process of quality shifting, which arise from quantity changes, which arise from motion. See Annotation 117, page 119. Since development is essentially an accumulation of motion, and motion is objective, development itself must also be objective. The principle of development states that development is a process that comes from within the thing itself. The process of solving the contradictions within things and phenomena. Therefore, development is inevitable, objective, and occurs without dependence on human will. Annotation 121. The thing in itself refers to the actual material object which exists outside of our consciousness. See Annotation 72, page 68. Development arises from motion and self-motion. See Annotation 62, page 59, with objective characteristics. Although human will can impact motion and development through conscious activity in the material world, see Relationship Between Matter and Consciousness, page 88, motion and development can and does occur without being dependent on human will. Human will is neither a requirement nor prerequisite for motion and development to occur. And a comment from me. Just the other day, I was having a conversation with someone about my proposal, my idea that the U.S. is in a state of collapse, if not outright failure. And the person with whom I was speaking objected to this idea because he said elites would still have power. In other words, in his mind, the fact that certain power structures might persist, if even in an altered form, means that change would not occur. And this is what this the concept of motion and development without regard for human will, this is where this is quite useful. It's quite helpful to help us to understand how things happen, how change is inevitable, whether we like it to occur or not. And now we continue the text. Development has the characteristic of generality because development occurs in every process that exists in every field of nature, society, and human thought, in every thing, every phenomena, and every idea, and at every stage of all things, phenomena, and ideas. Every transformation process contains the possibility that it might lead to the birth of a new thing, phenomena, or idea through a change in quality, i.e., development. And now we start annotation 122. In materialist dialectics, stage or stage of development refers to the current quantity and quality characteristics which a thing, phenomena, or idea possesses. Every time a quality change occurs, a new stage of development is entered into. Development has the characteristic of diversity because every thing, phenomena, and idea has its own process of development that is not totally identical to the process of development of any thing, phenomenon, or idea. Things and phenomena will develop differently in different spaces and times. Simultaneously, within their own processes of development, things, phenomena, and ideas are impacted by other things, phenomena, and ideas, as well as by many other factors and historical conditions. Such impacts can change the direction of development of things, phenomena, and ideas. They can even temporarily set development back, and or can lead to growth in one aspect, but degeneration in another. Annotation 123 now begins. Because development has the characteristic of generality and the characteristic of diversity, the principle of diversity in unity and unity in diversity also applies to development. See annotation 107, page 110. Meaning of the methodology. Materialist dialectics upholds that the principle of development is the scientific theoretical basis that we must use to guide our perception of the world and to improve the world. Improvement is stressed here. Therefore, in our perception and reality, we have to have a development viewpoint. According to Lenin, quote, dialectical logic requires that an object should be considered in development, in change, in self-movement, end quote. This development viewpoint, which holds that all things, phenomena, and ideas are constantly developing, and that development is thus unavoidable, requires us to overcome conservatism, stagnation, and prejudice, which are all opposed to development. Annotation 124 begins. Conservatism and prejudice are mindsets which seek to prevent and stifle development and to hold humanity in a static position. Not only is this detrimental to humanity, it is also ultimately a wasted effort because development is inevitable in human society, as in all things, phenomena, and ideas. Therefore, we must avoid and fight against such stagnant mindsets. And comment from me. One of the things that we note in the West and in so-called Silicon Valley, and in other areas of U.S.-based or generally Western circles, is the presentation of a false sense of progress. The word innovation is used to describe things that are not truly innovative at all. For example, various things having to do with apps on one's phone, which are just, how would I put this, rearrangements of existing technologies in ways that may or may not be clever. But each of these developments, which, and mind you, development can occur in both negative and positive directions. We've just heard this, yes? Each of these developments is not actually innovative in the sense that is meant, but is merely a rearranging of existing technical capabilities in order to maximize profit. So we see the importance of developing building a true development mindset, as Lenin advised and as the text is advising us to do. According to this development viewpoint, in order to perceive or solve any problem in real life, we must consider all things, phenomena, and ideas with their own forward tendency of development taken in mind. On the other hand, the path of development is a dialectical process that is reversible and full of contradictions. Therefore, we must be aware of this complexity in our analysis and planning. This means we need to have a historical viewpoint. See Annotation 114, page 116, which accounts for the diversity and complexity of development in perceiving and solving issues in reality. And now we come to Annotation 125. Materialist dialectics requires us to consider the complexity and constant motion of reality. By contrast, the metaphysical viewpoint, which considers all things, phenomena, and ideas as static, isolated entities, which have linear and simple processes of development, stands as a barrier to understanding this complexity and incorporating it into our worldview. Thus, it is vital that we develop comprehensive and historical viewpoints which acknowledge the diversity and complexity of reality. In summary, as a science of common relations and development, Marxist-Leninist materialist dialectics serve a very important role in perception and practice. Engels affirmed the role of materialist dialectics in this passage. An exact representation of the universe, of its evolution, of the development of mankind, and of the reflection of this evolution in the minds of men can therefore only be obtained by the methods of dialectics, with its constant regard to the innumerable actions and reactions of life and death, of progressive or retrogressive changes, end quote. Lenin also said, quote, dialectics requires an all-around consideration of relationships in their concrete development, but not a patchwork of bits and pieces, end quote. 3. Basic pairs of categories of materialist dialectics. Category is the most general grouping of aspects, attributes, and relations of things, phenomena, and ideas. Different specific fields of inquiry may categorize things, phenomena, or ideas differently from one another. Annotation 126. Translation note. In Vietnamese, the word phom thu is used here, which translates in this context more closely to the English philosophical term category of being, which means the most general, fundamental, or broadest class of entities. Category of being is sometimes simplified in English language philosophical discourse to category, which we have chosen to do here for ease of reading and to better reflect the way it reads in the original Vietnamese. Every science has its own system of categories that reflect the aspects, attributes, and basic relations that fall within its scope of study. For example, mathematics contains the categories arithmetic, geometry, point, plane, and constant. Physics contains the categories of mass, speed, acceleration, and force, and so on. Economics includes commodity, value, price, monetary, and profit categories. Every such category reflects only the common relations found within the specific fields that fall within the scope of study of a specific science. Categories of materialist dialectics, on the other hand, such as matter, consciousness, motion, contradiction, quality, quantity, reason, and result, are different. Categories of materialist dialectics reflect the most general aspects and attributes, as well as the most basic and general relations of not just some specific fields of study, but of the whole of reality, including all of nature, society, and human thought. Every thing, phenomena, and idea has many properties, including a reason for existing in its current form, a process of motion and change, contradictions, content, form, and so on. These properties are aspects, attributes, and relations that are reflected in the categories of materialist dialectics. Therefore, the relationship between the categories of specific sciences and categories of materialist dialectics is a dialectical relationship between the private and the common. See Private and Common, page 128. Annotation 127 includes a graphic which you will see on your screen, which within a circle contains categories visualized of, say, medicine, chemistry, physics, geography, mathematics, and it is labeled materialist dialectical categories, private and common, reason and result, obviousness and randomness, content and form, essence and phenomena, possibility and reality. And another note from me that these are some of the topics and the category pairs that Alchemy and I are reviewing in our series of interviews in which Alchemy gives us a nice overview and tour of materialist dialectics as the application of these ideas to real-world situations and thought. Also, there's a label for the graphic, which is the categories of specific sciences are limited to the scope of study, while the categories of materialist dialectics encompass all things, phenomena, and ideas. Unlike the categories contained within specific scientific fields, the philosophical categories of materialist dialectics can be used to analyze and define all things, phenomena, and ideas. The categories of specific scientific fields and the materialist dialectical categories have a private, common dialectical relationship, which is discussed on the next page. As a science of general relations and development, materialist dialectics summarizes the most general relations of every field of nature, society, and human thought into basic category pairs: private and common, reason and result, obviousness and randomness, content and form, essence and phenomena, possibility and reality. Annotation 128. Every individual materialist dialectical category has a dialectical relationship with another materialist dialectical category. Thus, all categories in materialist dialectics are presented as category pairs. So a category pair is simply a pair of categories within materialist dialectics, which have a dialectical relationship with one another. Note that this formalized system of category pairs reflects many decades of work by Vietnamese philosophical and political scientists based on the works of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and other socialist thinkers. Also note that these are not the only category pairs that can be discussed. There are potentially an infinite number of categories which can be used in materialist dialectical analysis. However, universal category pairs which can be applied to analyze any and all things, phenomena, and ideas are much fewer and farther between. That said, the universal category pairs discussed in this book are the ones which have most often been used by Marx, Engels, Lenin, and other prominent materialist dialecticians. Private and common. Categories of private and common. The private category encompasses specific things, phenomena, and ideas. The common category defines the common aspects, attributes, factors, and relations that exist in many things and phenomena. Within every private thing, phenomena, and idea, there exists the common, and also the unique. The unique encompasses the attributes and characteristics that exist in only one specific thing, phenomena, or idea, and does not repeat in any other things, phenomena, or ideas. And now we come to Annotation 129, which includes a graphic that uses apples to illustrate the point that you can have two private apples or you can have apples in common to show the difference between a private category and a common category. The private category includes specific individual things, phenomena, and ideas. The common category includes aspects, factors, and relations that exist in many things, phenomena, and ideas. For example, say there are two apples, apple A and apple B. Apple A is a specific individual object. Apple B is another distinct, separate object. In that sense, both apples are private apples and fall within the private category. However, both apple A and apple B share common attributes. For instance, they are both fruits of the same type, apple. They may have other attributes in common. They may be the same color. They may have the same basic shape. They may be of similar size, etc. These are common attributes which they share. Thus, apple A and apple B will also fall within the common category based on these common attributes. And Annotation 129 continues with another graphic that shows the diagram of private and common attributes. Apple A and apple B will also have unique attributes. Only apple A has the exact molecules in the exact place and time which compose apple A. There is no other object in the world which has those same molecules in that same place and time. This means that apple A also has unique properties. The common and private categories have a dialectical relationship. The common contains the private, and the private contains the common. Every private subject has some attributes in common with other private subjects. And common attributes can only exist among private subjects. Thus, everything, phenomena, and idea in existence contains internally within itself dialectical relationships between the private and the common, and has dialectical private-common relationships externally within other things, phenomena, and ideas. And this is illustrated through another graphic, which is labeled Diagram of Unique and Common Attributes, and also labeled All Private Subjects Have Attributes in Common with Other Private Subjects. It is also true that every private subject contains within itself unique attributes, which it does not share with any other thing, phenomenon, or idea. For example, Mount Everest is unique in that it is 8,850 meters tall. No other mountain on Earth has that exact same height. Therefore, the private subject, Mount Everest, has unique properties which it does not share with any other subject, even though it has other attributes in common with countless other private entities. Okay, everyone, we have hit the 30-minute mark, and I try to keep these recordings to that length because there's a lot of material to digest, and I think it's best to do it in reasonable chunks of time. In our next recording, we will continue the exploration of the category pairs. And fear not, there are many lovely illustrations to help make it plain and understandable. So till then, ciao.